Hello and welcome to today's lesson, which is going to be on factorising quadratics using the Xbox method, but this time where a isn't just 1, so where the number in front of x isn't just 1. So you can see in this example we've got a 2. So this starts off exactly the same. We're going to have a times c, so in other words the number in front of x squared multiplied by this constant, so 2 multiplied by 3. Which is 6. And this is where this is a little bit different to yesterday, because yesterday it was always 1 times this, but today we've got 2 times 3. And then in the bottom of my x, I'm going to put the b term, which is positive 5. But just like yesterday, I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to make 6, but add to make 5. So I'm going to go through my factor pairs for 6. I've got 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. Now this is one that catches people out often because 1 and 6, well, there's a difference of 5 there, so it seems like it could be 1 and 6, but the only way I can make 5 by adding 1 and 6 together is if it's actually negative 1 and 6, and it can't be negative 1 because that is not going to mean that I end up with a positive value here when I multiply the two numbers together. So it must be 2 and 3. These two multiply to make 6 and add to make 5. So now I'm going to fill in my box. This time I'm going to have 2x squared here, and I'm going to have 3 down here. And these two numbers are telling me the coefficients of the x terms, which are sitting in these parts of the grid. So I'm going to have 3x and 2x. So now I'm looking for my common factors. So common factors of 2x squared and 2x. What's the biggest thing that will divide into both of these? And that actually is 2x. So that's what's going here. What's the highest common factor of 2x squared and 3x? Well, that's going to be x. And then what's the highest common factor of 3x and 3? Well, that's positive 3. 2x and 3, well, the only thing that will divide into both of those is positive 1. So our two brackets are 2x add 3 multiplied by x add 1. And again, you can check that you've got that right just by expanding the brackets at the end to make sure you get back to where you started. Okay, I'm going to show you this one now because it really starts to show how useful the Xbox can be. So 6 and 12, I've got to multiply that together, and that's going to give me 72. And then in the bottom bit here, I'm going to put b, which is 17. So 72 is tricky. There are lots of factor pairs of 72. And I've got to go through each of them and decide which factor pair is going to allow me to make 17 by adding. So I've got 1 and 72, 2 and 36, 3 and 24, 4 and 18, 6 and 12, 8 and 9. Now I strongly advise you when you're doing this to actually write those down so that you can look at them and see which ones are going to work. 8 and 9, well, they add to make 17. So it looks like 8 and 9 are the two values that I want. Now I can fill in my box. I'm going to have 6x squared and positive 12, and then I'm going to have 9x and 8x. So I have got the common factor of 6x squared and 8x, and the highest common factor of those two is 2x. Whereas if I look along this bit right here, what's the highest common factor of 6x squared and 9x? Well, that is 3x. And 2x times 3x does make 6x squared, so that all looks good so far. Next, highest common factor of 9x and 12, well, that is going to be 3, so positive 3 there at the top. And the highest common factor of 8x and 12, well, that is going to be positive 4. So my two brackets are 2x add 3 multiplied by 3x add 4. And again, you could expand those just to check that it works. Okay, getting a little more tricky now because we've started to get some negatives in here, but I'm going to start off the same. 5 times 9 is 45, and then negative 46 is going in the bottom. So I need two numbers that will multiply to make 45 and add to make negative 46. So this at the top is positive. So when I multiply two numbers together to make a positive number, they must either both be positive or both be negative. But this underneath is negative. So if I'm going to add two numbers together to make a negative, but they're either both positive or both negative, well, they must both be negative. So now I'm going to start thinking about the factor pairs for 45. And the first one I come to is 1 and 45. And that is a good one because I know I can make 46 out of 1 and 45. So I don't really need to go any further, but you could list all of the others as well. But I know they both have to be negative because that's the only way they can add to make negative 46, but multiply to still make me a positive 45. So now I can fill in the rest of my grid. I know I'm going to have 5x squared and 9. And then I know now from the two numbers I've worked out, I'm going to have negative x and negative 45x. And now I can start to think about my highest common factors of each of the rows and columns. So here, highest common factor of these two, well, it's 5x. It's not negative 5x because, you know, this is positive here. And along this way, highest common factor here is x. And that works. 5x times x gives me 5x squared. Okay, now for the next bit, I'm going to have to multiply these two numbers together to make positive 9. But I'm going to have to multiply this x by this number to make negative x. So it makes sense that this and this are both going to have to be negative so that when I multiply them, I can get a positive 9. So the highest common factor of negative x and 9, well, that is going to be 1, and it's got to be negative 1. And here, highest common factor of these two, well, that is going to be negative 9. So my two brackets are x subtract 9 and 5x subtract 1. So it works in a very similar way, but you've just got to think carefully through about your positives and your negatives and how when you multiply them, if you're going to get a positive answer, you've either got to have both negative or both positive and so on and so forth. But again, you can expand your bracket at the end just to check that it does get you back to where you started. Okay, so here's some practice for you. Now, I know this is probably quite challenging, especially if this was new to you this year, but factorising quadratics is really, really key to the higher tier. It comes up again and again in other questions, not just questions where you're asked to factorise a quadratic, but where you've got to do other things. So we are going to get a lot of practice, but here is your opportunity to practice just factorising. Now, the red section here is like we were doing last lesson, where you've just got a is equal to 1, but you've got varieties of positives and negative terms. Then in the amber section, you've got where a is not just 1, you've got 2s and 3s and 5s and so on. And then the green section is difficult because your numbers start to get really big, which means that your number of factor pairs increase and you have to spend a bit more time thinking about which are your correct values. Okay, so pause the video at this point and see how you get on with this exercise.